Hello everyone, welcome back to another Deltarune video. Today, it's the Origins of Darkness 2. Now, if you're not familiar with the concept of this video, I did make an original one, obviously. That's what the 2 would be about. And it's basically looking at each Darkner that we've seen so far, trying to figure out what item they're based on, and then why that item is being interpreted in the Dark World the way that it is. Most Darkners, and this was before Chapter 3 and 4, we could kind of figure out why they translated the way they did through connotations, which is essentially the additional symbolic meanings we prescribe to everything in our daily lives. For example, and the one I always bring up when I'm explaining this concept, the rules card in a deck of cards is useless, right? It has no value within the game of cards. It's just an overly wordy descriptor of how the rules work, right? And so if the rules card was to become a Darkner we know as rules card, of course, you would expect it to be within the scope of those connotations. So overly wordy, kind of useless. That is rules, right? And essentially we are going to be applying that to every Darkner. The interesting new kernel that makes this video more intriguing for me, rather than just talking about the new Darkners, and the reason I'm going to talk about every single one, other than wanting to replace the old video because it's really bad, is that Chapter 3 and 4 added this extra dimension to why Darkners sort of present the way they do. And that is the Fountain Maker's intention, right? In Chapter 2, Susie's Dark Fountain is very different from the Dark Fountains of the Knight and Chris, which implies that if that fountain is the way it is because of Susie, then those fountains should be the way they are because of the Knight and Chris. So those Darkners can actually tell us something about the person who made the fountain, which is interesting. We could kind of reverse engineer our way to understanding some characters a little bit better by digging into the backstories of these Darkners. Now, without further ado, the playlist of music we're listening to in the background of this video is from Lavos on YouTube. Oh no, the World Destroyer. It is 2 hours long. I'm going to try to get through this 80 slide present show in 2 hours. So we're going to be kind of speed running a lot of these early ones, because they're very simple. Rabbik and Ribbik. Okay, these are both stains or dust or debris, right? Rabbik is a dust bunny, literally. That's why it looks like a bunny and acts like a bunny. And Rabbik is a frog. Ribbik is a glooby stain, which is why Tenna says he's never glooby in the beginning, too. It's a reference to this one event. Now, you would expect, potentially, a sticky stain to potentially turn into a frog, because frogs are known to be sticky and slimy, right? That all makes sense. And given it's lost under the couch, just like the denizens of quote-unquote man country are lost under the couch, it kind of makes sense that Ribbik would be the Darkner that we can use in order to enter this back rooms area that we can't access in other ways. The animals and their cages. Golden Sam, Golden Sun, Silver Sam. They're all just animal crackers. There's really not much else to them. Although Golden Sun could be a reference to the game Golden Sun, which is why they're like, I wish there was another Golden Sun, because, there hasn't been. Scissor Dancer. It's scissors. I can't actually find any good documentation on this, because I don't know, why would there be? But I know when I was younger, anyway, in arts and crafts or whatever, you would take the scissors, and on one blade you would put one sort of sharp end into the desk and then spin it around, and it would kind of look like a ballet dancer. And that's what I think the scissor dancer is supposed to be in reference to, but I cannot find anybody who's ever done it for some reason. So I can't really say that this isn't just a cultural touch point for me alone. But I also put this in the last video and nobody argued it, so I assume you guys have also done this, or you've seen people done this, or that makes sense too. Mr. Elegance and Mr. Society. So they are a chess knight and a chess bishop, respectively, which is pretty funny, considering we had chess theory going on for so long. I remember that being a point of evidence against, even though that doesn't really make sense. Now, that said, they're pretty weird. Mr. Elegance, I guess it kind of makes sense that like a horse is elegant, and it does sort of like neigh like a horse. Sure. Mr. Society is a little weird. I guess if you were to like study, when you're studying history in high school specifically, which is of course where this takes place, this chapter, bishops are like, you know, they're not the merchant class, they're the upper class, right? So it kind of makes sense for a bishop to manifest as Mr. Society. The interesting part about these two, maybe the most interesting thing, is like, where did Mr. Society go? In chapter 2, if you go over to the ledge where you sort of enter the castle town area from the first time in chapter 1, you can talk to Mr. Society. He just flies off and says he'll come back later. And he didn't come back. So where is he? The Pippins, okay, they're dice. They even have the same sort of etymology where like one die is a die, not a dice. So one Pippins is a Pippin, not a Pippins, not a Pippin. There we go. I got it. And they're like shady casino dealer, gambler types, because dice, you know. Bloxers, Lego blocks, although not specifically Lego, of course. And of course, blocking is also something you do in boxing, so it makes sense that it manifests as a block boxer. And funnily enough, in the Czech dialogue, Bloxer is not very good at blocking. So, very good. C round / K round. So this is a checker, obviously. And I believe the reason that C round acts so much like a little stupid baby is because checkers is a quote unquote baby game. You know, it's chess for babies, right? And then it gets crowned, just like checkers get crowned when they get to the opposite side of the board, which is what C-Round literally does in Chapter 1, to become more powerful. And it is funny, because later we get another very simple enemy that can't understand our warning for Susie, or that can, rather, understand our warning for Susie, but C-Round can't still. So even as a full crowned checker, it is still a stupid baby. Makes sense. Malleus. Malleus is a squeaky hammer. And hammers are the universal symbol for repairing things in like video games and fiction. Now that said, there is potentially something interesting with Malleus, which is that if the knight made this fountain, and we already know the knight presumably knows Gerson quite well, because they can manifest Gerson as a Darkner in the church fountain, maybe the reason why this hammer immediately turns into a smith is because of that connection. Like, they instantly think about Gerson. After all, this is his class, so it's not that surprising that would be on their mind. An extra little detail, maybe, to Malleus. Hathi and Head Hathi. Well, we see in Ralsei's little explanation of Darkners in the beginning of Chapter 3 that they are hearts cards. And so, as you might expect, Hathi is a quiet and kind healer because the heart is a symbol of health and love and kindness. And then Head Hathi as like the upper level version of the enemy. It says in like Czech descriptions that it's less kind but more efficient. So maybe it's like following its head instead of following its heart, quote unquote, that sort of saying. Which, you know, it's like a stereotype of doctors being cold but also efficient, right? So maybe that's where that's coming from. Rudin and Rudin Ranger. Again, we can see in the Ralsei cutscene at the beginning of Chapter 3 that they are diamonds cards. Diamonds are associated with riches and greed, so that explains Rudin's behavior. Rudin Ranger, on the other hand, seems to be based on the Power Rangers. They have little diamonds on their costume, just like the Rudins do. So that's funny. That explains the strange helmet-shaped thing. Newbert. All right, I can actually show a picture of it this time so that I'm not just trying to explain it in words. Newbert is the little red nub on some laptops. It's like a secondary trackpad. So you have the big square one and then this little one that acts as a mouse too. And within the world of Deltarune, everybody loves Newbert. Why? Because people used to steal these off the computers all the time at school. It's just what happened, because they easily came off. So they were taken. Everybody loves Newbert, inexplicably. That's why. Trashy, speaking of inexplicable, Trashy's obviously a trash can. I think we all kind of understand that. The reason Chapter 2 Trashy and Chapter 3 Trashy are completely different is because Chapter 2's Trashy is unloved because within the world of computers, the trash can was essentially retired to make room for the recycling bin a long time ago, right? You don't delete files in the trash can anymore. It's a recycling bin. In Chapter 3, however, the Dreamer's trash can is constantly getting flowers from Toriel. So the idea that it would be like a cool guy sort of trash can does make some sense. The Hacker. Okay, this one's a little funny. Now, the Hacker, if you'll notice, doesn't actually hack anything in Chapter 2. And he is clearly a computer cursor. So what he actually does is point out shortcuts. So he's literally a pointer. Plus, a computer mouse is what you use to click on shortcuts to open programs. So that makes sense. Mouse and mouse wheel. They're just computer mice acting like regular mice. Although mouse wheel is a bit more complicated, right? It references a computer's mouse that you spin to move up and down a page, obviously. And the fact that mice often run on wheels in their cages. It could also potentially be a reference to the Rat King, which I'm not going to show right now, but the basic premise is it's rats that's tails get stuck together and then they die, and it's horrifying. So look it up at your own peril, all right? It's possible, I mean, this is just a little funny tidbit, that mouse wheel might get faster as it spins more, which is in a check dialogue, because when you start spinning the mouse wheel on your mouse to scroll down a page, it goes faster and faster as you spin with more vigor. So they're literally getting more powerful the faster they spin, right? Swatch and the Swatchlings. There was actually a piece of concept art released right like the day I'm recording this voiceover, so I should have put it on here. But it shows much more clearly that Swatch is an MS Paint program. And the Swatchlings, I believe, are basically the same. Maybe not the program itself, but the colors or the color match tools within it. Basically, they are a combination of the idea of MS Paint and an actual physical swatch, which allows you to match colors, which is why that's one of their main gimmicks within the Dark World. They're also butlers because the MS Paint program doesn't do anything itself, right? The program is made specifically so that you can create things. They are at your service, just like a butler would be. Ambulance. Okay, and Vero Vero Kun. 2 for 1 on this page. Well, that was true of the last page too, but whatever. Vero Vero Kun is a computer virus. It has the connotations, therefore, of being like a real-life virus, where it's sickly, but also computer viruses are often depicted as like, you know, stealthy burglars or infiltrators of your computer data, right? And this lines up perfectly well with Ambulance, who is both a, doctor or ambulance and some sort of police officer. So the police officer half counters the criminal half, and the ambulance half counters the sickly half. It all goes perfectly together because it's an antivirus. Task and Task Manager. So tasks are open computer tabs, and I feel kind of stupid because when I made this first video, it somehow didn't occur to me that the reason it turns into a cat is because there's a breed of cat called a tabby. They're tabby cats. Get it? Haha. And so, yeah, they get out of control and cause trouble because, you know, if you have too many tabs open, it slows down the computer and it could crash. Task Manager, on the other hand, is literally the Task Manager program on a computer, which the job of a Task Manager program is to essentially monitor the other programs to keep them in line so they don't crash the computer. And that might be a turn on the phrase, it's like herding cats, right? Which is supposed to be a sort of colloquialism for doing something that's impossible or pointless. Shadow Guy. We got our first Chapter 3, Darkner. We made it. I firmly believe Shadow Guy is these action figures in the windows of the Dreamer household, or whatever they are. I'm not really sure. It's never strictly confirmed, because they're very much more based on like noir TV programs and all of that. But they should have some sort of physical object, because Tana leaves the Dark World. And we'll get into the trouble with that later. But I presume that these shadowy action figures are here for a reason. And that is so Shadow Guy can be around. They don't disappear when we take them. But then, to be fair, Chapter 3's Dark World is the only Dark World we can actually revisit after we've done it, other than Chapter 1, and we take that down like immediately. So it really seems like maybe there has to be a little leeway given to the Chapter 3 Darkners, where they probably wouldn't all disappear, because otherwise the house would be empty, you know? But hey, maybe a few of these action figures came along. And yeah, they're associated with noir films, and the phrase "knock your socks off" is probably why they have that whole sock thing, which is, you know, it's a turn of phrase that originated around the same time. So that makes sense. Zapper. Zapper's a TV remote. It also kind of looks like a joystick, which makes me wonder if maybe it's like a combination TV remote game controller. But it's mostly a TV remote for sure. It acts as a bouncer, because TV remotes are what essentially allows you to access channels. So it essentially being the little blockades between Tena's sets, which basically serve as the different channels on the TV, makes perfect sense. They could also be bouncers because of Chris's specific associations between the TV remote and the parental safety features, which we see represented as those gates later in Chapter 3. Because, like, you know, you'd have to enter the code on the remote. The remote seems like the thing that's stopping you from accessing the cool music channel, etc. The cup tins. They're little soldier cups. And the reason for that is twofold. One, they kind of look like stereotypical soldier hats a little bit, at least in their design. But the reason why in the light world the connotations that bring them as soldiers is because of Mizzle and Miss Mizzle, actually. They take on the role of princesses trapped in towers, water towers, you might say. And the cups are the only ones that can free the princesses because, you know, they're cups. So that's their intended purpose, which means they take on the form of the opposite role in that kind of a fairy tale story, which are little knights or soldiers. Wicca Bell. Honestly, there's not as much to Wicca Bell as you'd think. She's just one of those handbells that's in Chapter 4's music room there in the church. And she has her bad reputation, which we see from a certain Darkner that's near a stone one in Chapter 4. Oh, the terrible witches, they ran curses with bladed familiars. They were sealed away for being too fun. I mean evil. So that bad reputation is because children couldn't resist playing the bells even when they weren't supposed to. So Alvin stopped using them, essentially. Wingblade. Hey, remember the last slide where it says bladed familiars? That's Wingblade. It's a feather quill. We can find that out pretty easily because in before it becomes a Darkner in Susie's Dark World, it's an object, interestingly, in the first Dark Fountain. And in there it is a feather pen that Gerson gives to Susie. So that's basically confirmed. Now, it could be that this turns into an angel, sort of biblically accurate angel thing, due to the way Susie sees Gerson's words, or like the prophecy as some arcane, otherworldly thing. And it might also be a reference to the pen is mightier than the sword as sort of a turn of phrase. And, you know, it could also just be that Susie sees Chris's pencil turn into a sword. So she just naturally thinks that a pen should turn into a sword in the Dark World. And so it does. Organic. As best as I can tell, they're just the organ's pipes. It's a little bit of a weird thing that there's so many of them. But, there is a lot of pipes on an organ. It's possible they picked up the trait of being all philosophic because they stand around where Alvin reads Gerson's words, and Gerson is known for questioning the prophecy, though it could also just be for the fact that Susie doesn't believe in the prophecy wholeheartedly. So her version of the Dark World has these little scribes that are more so skeptical than they are true believers, which is obviously the opposite of the little wafer guys that we see in the first Dark Fountain. And yes, as the name would suggest, it's literally just called wafer. They are communion wafers, which is what their head is. There's really not much more to them than that. Communion wafers are associated with religion, so it would make sense they turn into like a priest. Old Man Gerson. So, we actually get direct confirmation of what Gerson is. It's explained to us, probably because we need to know about it for later in the game. He's Gerson's hammer, infused with his dust to bring him back to life, essentially, through a Darkner's memories. Or a Lightner's memories, I should say. It's the Night. I'm talking about the Night. The fact that he can exist in the Night's fountains, but not in Susie's, implies the Night knows him much better than Susie does, right? Which, yeah, Susie met him for like an hour at most, so that makes sense. But it does mean that the Knight should probably be somebody older than Chris and Susie, somebody who got to have Gerson as a teacher or knew him as an adult, right? I bet you didn't expect to see the Titans and the Titan spawn this early. They're actually not super complicated because Ralse explains them to us. Thanks, Ralse. He says, "It's the fear of dark. It's the bump in the night. It's the shadow of the backside of your mind." So essentially they're the fear of dark brought to life as Darkners. And I think they're literally shadows, like the shadows on the floor of the church, brought to life as monsters that represent the Darkner's fear, or the Lightner's fears of the dark, right? There's like a baby form and a big Titan form. Now, there is this little spindly form, which you might have never seen before. I do think it's related. It's just called Unknown in the files, and it shows up in that one wet water room that's all dark. You can see it only silhouetted. So I even had to add the outline so you can see it on this slide because the background is black. That could be the fear of water, I guess. The fear of deep water, maybe? I don't really know. We don't know that much about this thing yet, so it's hard to say. All right, now, part 2, where things get a little interesting. There's some little quirks to these ones. First off, the wobbly thing, the very first Darkner we see, that I didn't really think was a Darkner, even by the time I made on the Origins of Darkners part 1. But given what we see in Chapter 3, where the cactus can turn into a Darkner, I think it's fair to say these things are probably Darkners too. They're just mold. That's really it. The only thing of note about this is that now we know plants can turn into Darkners, which means the flowers in Asgore's flower shop can turn into Darkners. All right. Here's where the interesting stuff starts. The Plug Boys and the Werewires. So, Ram confirms Plug Boys are power strips. You would think they would just be outlets, but no, they're actually full power strips. He says this in a line that says, "Chris, are you sure you're feeling normal?" "Well, you are talking to a power strip, so maybe not." Thanks, Ram. Wire and Werewire, on the other hand, are powered up, plugged in power strips. They're literally powered up in terms of getting stronger in the gameplay because they are receiving electrical power as a power strip. So there you go. Now, the important thing to note about Ram specifically is that he's different from the other Plug Boys, right? All the other Plug Boys are these pink little guys. And Ram confirms he came from the computer lab in a different line of dialogue. So why is he different? Well, once again, this is the result of the Lightner who created the Dark Fountain imbuing the Darkners with specific traits. Chris knew this power cord as a toy, an object they played with like a toy, back when they were younger. And so when they created this Dark Fountain, Ram became Ram instead of just a generic plug boy. It's just further cementing this idea that the Lightner's own sort of beliefs about an object are what make the Darkners what they are. So it's not general connotations. It's not the connotations of the whole town, which is sort of what the first video was about. Or my first On the Origins of Darkner video is what I mean. It was on the belief that it's the general connotations applied to an object. No, it is the connotations that the specific creator of the Dark Fountain is applying onto the specific objects. So that's something very important to keep in mind as we continue on here. Queen. Well, here's a great example. Queen acts like Toriel and Carol combined, probably because, as she is a laptop, as we see in Ralsei's explanation of Darkners, this is the last time we're going to really talk about this. Well, actually, there's Lancer. I think Lancer's next, too. Yeah, he is. Well, it's probably because of the idea of a motherboard, right? A motherboard is what makes a computer go. So that would lead to the association within somebody's mind, perhaps, that Queen should be like a mother. I do think this confirms that the knight has to be somebody who knows Toriel and Carol pretty well. Because we see in Chapter 4 Toriel's drinking problem, which Queen also drinks casually a lot and has her very destructive glass and, you know, leans on Chris in a very similar sort of behavior as Toriel in Chapter 4. And that's something that she doesn't show people usually, right? Like, I don't think that's something the whole town knows about her. Maybe they knew that, like, back in the day she used to get crazy at parties or whatever. Like, that's sort of the implication in Undertale. But they certainly don't know that she's still doing that, or if she is. Either way, I think this does imply that the knight is somebody who knows Toriel and Carol quite well. They even know that, like, deep down, Carol, despite her overprotectiveness and really abusiveness, is doing all of that as a way to try to protect Noelle or make her stronger, right? I completely believe that that sort of arc for Queen is exactly what Carol is doing as well. So, I mean, it's just more evidence the knight is probably Des. Especially because it's implied by Ram in this same dialogue that Chris was playing these games with a girl. And now that girl could be Noelle, and that would be the most logical thing, right? But remember, it's not everybody's connotations that create these dark worlds the way they are. It's the person who makes them. So the person who makes it would have to associate the laptop with, you know, the motherboard thing and then extrapolate that onto Toriel and Carol and also know both of them quite well. So really, it can only be Des, right? Like, that's the only person who would know all that. Or Chris. But, like, are we going to go there? I don't know. Lancer. Lancer's the Jack of Spades. I mean, we already knew that. This card isn't super descriptive. Like, it doesn't really show us. He could be the Ace of Spades, according to this card, but then Hathy could also be the Ace of Hearts, which obviously isn't true. And the role that Lancer plays is definitely more befitting of a Jack than it is an Ace. Where, you know, the Jack of Spades, originally called the Knave of Spades, the knave is essentially a term for a boy servant, a person of humble birth. So, yeah, that kind of sounds like Lancer. Lancer is the boy. that tracks. He likes digging holes and splat noises and riding his bike. That's all very stereotypical young boy things to do, right? Did you know the couch can walk in Chapter 3? I didn't. It can. And it's got a face and a crown. Kind of like Chariel. But it's confirmed that in Chapter 2, Toriel says, our couch is used to being used as a bed. Which is probably in reference to Asgore sleeping on the couch. So, this couch having a crown and sort of acting as Asgore's Chariel. Sure, that makes sense. Pawn Man. Hey, I was talking about this earlier. So, Pawn Man is a pawn in chess. Pawns are the most basic chess piece, and therefore, they turn into a basic organism. the most basic, in fact, a singular-celled organism. They've got a nucleus and an eye spot in their check dialogue. And the funny part about this is, despite being like a unicellular organism and therefore being incapable of actually, having thoughts even, other than instinct, Pawn Man can understand the party's warnings while C-Round can't, which is probably strengthening the idea that chess is for smart people and checkers is for babies, right? Like, even the lowest single-celled organism chess piece can understand our words when the checker can't. And I've got a comment here from the first video, actually. There's going to be a few of these sprinkled in, where Katsuatsu, it's a fun name, brings up the idea that they could also be a single-celled organism because a square on a chessboard is a cell, and so pawns can only move a single cell at a time. That's increased explanation for why it's a single-celled organism. Okay, this one's a little weird. The coat hanger and the little ball. Now, these are jacks, right? Jacks is a game where you have a little ball, and you have all these quote-unquote coat hangers, these metal toys. And the idea with jacks is you throw up the ball and try to pick up as many jacks as you can before it hits the ground so you can catch it. That is not related to these two at all. The little ball, it's not trying to bounce as high as it can or something like that. And the jacks, there's not many of them and you have to collect them or something. No, instead the jack is a coat hanger because I guess visually it kind of looks like a coat hanger, and the little ball is just a ball. In fact, its whole character is that I'm just a ball, And what this implies is that the knight doesn't know how to play jacks, which is probably pointless. Like, it doesn't really tell us anything. But given that jacks is a game that isn't really played anymore, it could imply that the knight is not old. The knight is still relatively young. So older than Susie and Chris, but younger than someone like Mrs. Boom, for sure. You know what I mean? So, just a nice little gap where Des can easily fit in, once again. Fomped. Okay, did you even know this guy existed? Probably. Chapter 2's been out long enough, I'm sure you've seen him. Fomped is a floppy disk, but it doesn't... Just like the jacks, it implies that the knight doesn't know what a floppy disk actually does, because it says, "Hee, shall I help you save? No, I shan't. I haven't the faintest idea what that is. Hee." And this is because, obviously, the save icon in a lot of modern programs is still a floppy disk, despite the fact we don't use those anymore. And again, this implies that the knight is relatively young. There's someone that doesn't know what a floppy disk does. They only know it as the save icon from their digital programs that they grew up with. Which, that might kind of be tough for Carol, to not know what a floppy disk does. I feel like she would probably know that. But hey. Starwalkers. Oh god, this one. Alright. Starwalkers are weird. We all know that. The original Starwalker is clearly a joke about concept art, so I don't think we really need to think too hard about that, but he could come in useful later, because I think, based on some comments from the first video specifically, that the Starwalker birds are in fact stickers. They're those little star stickers you get when you do good in school, right? You get a little star, because this is Gerson's unused classroom, right? So it makes sense. And I have a comment here from the first video by Arachnohood, who says, when you get a good job sticker in preschool or something, you feel proud, powerful even, like you're above everyone else, or like the angel. Thus, the Starwalker has angel wings. But when the school day ends, you would usually take the sticker off before the next one. Kind of like how birds become powerless, or how the birds, not just birds in general, after the bell rings. Because what sound usually signals the end of a school day? A bell. So the idea is, you get a special sticker, maybe on your hand or your cheek or your piece of paper, and it makes you feel all proud for the day. But as soon as school ends and the, end of day bell rings, because the way you defeat these enemies is by ringing a bell, after all, the sticker loses all its power because, you're not in school and it doesn't mean anything to anybody anymore. Very, very smart. I like this one a lot. Balthazard. Balthazar is this little incense holder you can see in Alvin's study. It turns into a turtle with fire, probably because the outside of an incense burner kind of looks like a shell. And obviously it's a burner, so it's got fire associations. And it mostly uses smoke too, which is obviously incense is smoke. So that all makes sense. There is a potential alternative interpretation, though, where Balthasar is a turtle because the knight is associating the incense burner, which we only see in Alvin's office, with Alvin specifically. They are associating this incense burner with turtles because Alvin's a turtle and he's the one who has the incense burner. Very interesting. Jackenstein. So Jackenstein is this little Halloween decoration specifically, or I guess it's actually the candle inside the Halloween decoration, and the Halloween decoration is more of a like mech suit that it is wearing. And I think specifically it references Frankenstein because it seems to be an amalgamation of different Halloween decorations sort of morphed together into this outer body that's around the little candle guy. So just like Frankenstein, it's a bunch of parts sewn together, right? And Halloween is already associated with Frankenstein. That all sort of tracks. Mr. Ant Tenna. Da-da-da-da-da. Tenor? No. Tenna is the Dreamer family's TV. We all know that. And it's likely that he became a game show host type character because of Chris associating the TV with playing video games. So, a TV game. Oh, a game show. But did you know he was going to be an ant? That's why there's Mr. Ant Tenna in the opening scene. That's just fascinating to me. I wish he was still an ant. That's so funny. And it kind of gives him a little bit more personality than him just being a TV guy. Like, I know we all love Tenna. It's a very cool sprite and implementation in the game. But if he was a little ant, I think that'd be cool too. It makes sense of the shrinking and the like flower on his nose, and yeah, there's a lot to it. Bibliox. What a name, right? It's a book that turns into a wizard. This is because, the power of imagination comes from books. You see that all the time. But also, spell books are associated with wizards, so it makes sense that Bibliox can cast spells out of books. That said, there is only a single Bibliox in Chapter 3, and it's the one that you can only get to by going through the couch, right? Or it leads you to going through the couch. It's on that quest line. So I think this literally has to be the hymnal, which is interesting because there are a bunch of books upstairs in the Dreamer house. So it could imply that the Biblioxes are specifically only the hymnals that are within the church as well. So like Lord of the Hammer, for example, didn't become a Bibliox in the church's little bookshelf outside of the main foyer, or in the foyer. And that's just intriguing. Because it means that, like, regular books haven't become Darkners. Yet. So that could still happen. Shudda! Okay, this one's juicy, alright? Now, I've seen a lot of people talk about Shudda and say, what the hell is this thing? And, yeah, I get that. It's very weird. But here's my explanation for you, alright? Shudda is AV cables, or actually specifically V cables. We'll get to that. Tenna calls it a camera thing, and it takes pictures with the camera, but remember, Darkners aren't a literal translation of an object, right? They are a translation of the connotations of an object. And AV cables, specifically, bring video to the TV. So it being Tenna's cameraman makes a lot of sense. It's sort of an extrapolation of it showing the TV's picture originally in the light world. And it just works for the design way better because video cables specifically are red, yellow, blue, and green. What color is Shudda? Oh, red, yellow, blue, and green. Even the little yellow parts on top of its arms, I guess, where its eyes go, look like the ports that you plug video cables into on the back of a TV. It all perfectly fits. And the best part about this, because, okay, you could say, if it's an AV cable, where's the A part? Where's the audio technician part of it? Well, if you'll notice, Shudda doesn't have the white cable in its body, which is the audio cable. So it's just video cables, essentially. And yeah, that's it. It's just a cool translation of an object into a darkener. Cootie. Yeah, that's right. Cootie. It's a worm, and it's a worm. That's its whole personality. It's based on this game, Cootie. The Cootie game is about assembling bugs, and Cootie, the character in Deltarune, is one of this worm-shaped bugs. So it all just kind of tracks. Mizzle and Miss Mizzle. Okay, the reason why I had to do the Cuptons first, even though it was more awkward, is because these guys have a lot more to them. So I explained earlier that they're princesses trapped in towers, but they also have sort of a Sleeping Beauty angle to them as well, which is extra fun. Now, Mizzle is regular water. Miss Mizzle is holy water. Interestingly, we learn in the very beginning parts of Chapter 4 that Alvin has set up a camera in front of the holy water to try to catch whoever keeps drinking it. And then we find out the person who's been drinking it is, it's Caddy. So that, I think, is why there's this whole mini game you play in their attacks where you have to dodge sort of like an eyeball that's watching you. That's the camera. And then the reason they turn pink when you spare them is because there's a reference in the dialogue too to flavor packets that, you know, turn the water into juice. The red juice from the punch bowl, right? It all comes together. Now there's these lines, and this was brought to my attention by commenters. The bluest flower, a disciple of my speech, shy to no camera and a specimen of elegance and kindness. That could be in reference to the blue flower from Asgore's flower shop. It's like a sort of a pass it on thing to Chapter 5 in the same way that like Jevil talks about Queen and Spamton talks about CRTs, right? So that's kind of cool. And again, it mentions the camera, which I have highlighted in there, which also implies that, you know, that's related to why they are the way they are. It's kind of funny. The camera is kind of like the dragon guarding the tower. I'm surprised we didn't get something with that. Gwei. Okay, this one's also crazy. Gwei is a candle. I would not have thought that at any point. However, it's definitely true. There's flavor text which says, Gwei's flames flicker weakly. You know, candles are known to flicker. A strange spirit said to appear when the moon waxes. Get it? Because candles are made of wax. And there is candles in the foyer in Chapter 4. The Hope Candles. And oh boy, the implications there go deep. Because the Hope Candles associated to the people who are dead in the graveyard. Because there's some more dialogue, sort of flavor text that happens when you're in the battle with Gwei, where it says, Gwei turns its head like a bird. Snowy's mom. It rattles its claws. That could also be Snowy's mom. Gwei wags its tail. That could be Mutler the dog. And Gwei howls hauntingly. That could also be Mutler the dog. But, interestingly, a couple of these lines can overlap, right? Rattling his claws could also refer to Mutler, because dogs also have claws. And howls hauntingly could also refer to Shira, right? Because she's a banshee, essentially. So yeah, it's very interesting. Also, this unused sprite is kind of terrifying, where it stands up on its hind legs. I don't like it. Oh, I guess the last thing I'll say about this is that Gerson recruits them, right? Kind of a ironic twist that the other dead guy would be the one who recruits them in that one scene early on. Jevil. Jevil's the last of the interesting ones. After that, we get into the weird ones. So get ready. Anyway, Jevil is the Joker card in a deck of cards, with some Devil Jester influences thrown in. As many people pointed out in the first video, because somehow I missed this, I don't really know why. The Joker card is a wild card in games of cards. So if you're like missing a specific card, you can sub in the Joker as the 5 of Hearts if that's missing, for example. So when Joker says, I can do anything, it's true, because he's a wild card, and wild cards can fill in any role. Now, the devil part is a little less clear. However, it could be because Jevil has been influenced by a certain other character that is already associated with devilish behavior. And see, the funny part is you don't know whether I'm talking about Gaster or Friend yet. We'll get there. Part 3. That's so weird. Jigsaw. The reason why this one, and the puzzle guys, I forgot there's 2 of them in this one again. The reason why this one's starting off the weird category is like, why are these 2 different creatures? They're both puzzle pieces, clearly. I guess they could be from different puzzles, but they both also have the same connotations, which is they are trying to make ends meet, as the colloquialism would go. They're trying to pay the bills, but they're also trying to connect to each other like puzzle pieces. They're trying to make their ends meet. Get it? I don't know why they would be different, though. I can't explain that. Lots more unexplainable stuff to come. Pop-up. Pop-up is weird. I mean, we all know that already. But I think I've maybe figured it out. So, pop-up is a pop-up ad on a computer. It is also based on a jack-in-the-box, hence the lid on top of its head and the little perforated legs that can spring up. And it's Fin, your friend from the magic world of Teo. I think I can make all of these things come together, all right? Here's my insane rant about Fin. So, Fin is a digital pet. It is sort of a antiquated idea of having a little thing on your desktop, although Fin isn't on your desktop, but, you know, usually they were, that is just kind of like a little program that walks around and does stuff and you feed it, right? Bonzi Buddy is also a digital pet. And Bonzi Buddy is specifically infamous for being a huge scam product. It steals your login information and shows you a bunch of pop-up ads. And it's like impossible to uninstall it. So if we combine these 2 ideas together, the reason why it's a virtual pet is because virtual pets are in some way associated with pop-up ads through Bonzi Buddy. It's a long, winding road to get there, but we got there. Also, pop-up, pup, as at the end of its name, so that might be why a virtual pet is the first thing that is associated with it, right? The fire extinguisher. Okay, well, at least this one, I don't have much to say about him. I don't really know why he's like a rooster. I don't really know why he's a priest. I guess because he listens to the sermons, so he's like become a priest. I guess a fire extinguisher kind of looks like a rooster if you like really, really, really squint. If you guys have any ideas why this would be the case, I would be very interested to know. The sound of justice. Oh god, so this is another complicated one for sure. Rouse explains that this creature is a statue of Gerson that was brought to life by Susie's will when creating her dark fountain to see Gerson again, because she didn't actually have the ability to bring Gerson back. However, she could bring an facsimile of Gerson back, essentially, like a statue, to come to life. And this is funny because Susie idolizes Gerson, and so when she tries to make a fountain to bring back her idol, she literally brings life to an idol of Gerson, like a literal idol. So that, you know, kind of ironic. It is kind of weird, though, because if you watch the scene with the Sound of Justice, in those flashes where the Sound of Justice is doing attacks, it has a regular night face on it. It is like the statues in Gerson's sort of area. However, when Susie shoots the healing magic at it, it turns into this weird monster guy. I don't know why that would be the case. And also, Rouse just killed this guy with no remorse. Like, I understand it was, like, attacking Susie, but, like, it's still a Darkner, right? Rouse killed it. Like, straight up dead. Not even, like, you know, let it run away or beat it. It's just something I thought I'd mention. Top Chef, Mama Amoeba. Thank goodness somebody commented 2 weeks ago something that has made this make more sense to me, because beforehand, this was one of my weakest ones ever. So let me explain. Top Chef is a spinning top. Why is he a chef? Well, there is the show Top Chef, so it could be in reference to that. But then if it's related to the show Top Chef, why is he such a screw-up? Well, Chapter 3 actually gives us a reason. And this is crazy. So, Tenna talks about how the Dreamer kids used to watch cooking shows and make fun of them by doing over-the-top impressions. Like, oh, they burned the water or whatever. Remember that? Well, that might be why Top Chef is the way he is. But funnily enough, if you really read between the lines here, Tenna says the Dreamer kids used to do this. Not just that the kids used to do this. So does this imply that Chris actually did make the Chapter 1 fountain? Because that's definitely possible, right? Of all the fountains that we've seen, other than obviously Chapter 3, which they definitely made, Chapter 1's fountain was made before we entered the story. And it just adds a lot of interesting levels to examining those Darkners. Because if so, it would kind of invalidate the idea that the knight has to be a young person because they don't know about jacks, right? It wouldn't invalidate the one about them not knowing about floppy disks. But, yeah, I don't know. Top Chef. Somehow the key to all of this. Okay, Sweet Captain KK. Remember these guys? They were supposed to be a big deal. Well, in the concept art, they are called a radio cassette player, a speaker, and a radio cassette player. In the actual game, they are called a radio cassette player, a speaker, and a CD player. KK is a CD player. KK is a radio cassette player. Which is it? Well, I'm going to go with the in-game version, obviously, but I was always under the impression that Captain and KK were the same thing. Because they look so similar, but, whatever. So, a speaker, cassette player, and a CD player. The rebellious teens due to being associated with old music sort of equipment. So the stereotypes around rock and roll and early hip hop and rap in the 2000s. Like these music genres, the rebelliousness is often performative. We're just rebels. We don't want to get in trouble. Not to say that all rock music or all hip hop and rap is performative, but there's definitely a large element to it that is, right? And these guys, they represent that. So there you go. That's it. The weird part is just this. Sham. Well, I don't know what I would call Sham other than strange or weird, so... We know what Sham is. Sham is a stuffed toy cat that's seen better days. Yes, has been stitched back together, it seems. There's just so much confusing about Sham. But for now, let's just say Sham is an old toy, so that's why Sham manifests as a wise sort of mentor figure. And Sham is damaged. So that would mean Sham, that might imply the nihilism part of Sham's character. Maybe. Weirdly enough, a picture of Sham is on Azrael's, wow, that's a bad misspelling of Azrael, whatever, desktop background. Here, I'll read this for you. Susie. What is this computer wallpaper? What age did you and your brother draw this at? Glad we didn't go to this cyber world. What the hell? Hey, and in the corner, that's the cat thing from Castletown. The shop thing, the cat, the Stitch thing, whatever. Why? Why does Azrael have some sort of connection to Sham? It's very, very suspicious. I will say that. Especially because Sham seems to have some connection to, otherworldly knowledge that usually only shadow crystal holders can get around. Plus, they know the shadow crystals exist. It's just crazy. Alright, the 7 Flying Aces and the Faded Rudin. I can't be the first person that's connected these two, right? Now, to be clear, the 7 Flying Aces are multiple colors. I just didn't want to go through the hassle of cutting out and resizing the 4 different Flying Aces sprites. You get the idea. The Flying Aces are photocopied cards that Chris made in black and white and then colored in. And one of them says, There aren't 7. Well, you named us. If you were good at counting cards, you wouldn't have needed to cheat. So, there are 6 flying aces in the Couch Dark World, and there is 1 faded ace, or 1 faded Rudin, could be an ace, I suppose, in the Castle Town that was in Chapter 1 and was brought here. Notably, this faded Rudin seems to have knowledge of the world beyond, the regular scope, just like Sham does. They know the name of the file that you're playing on, for example. So the fact that its color is faded could relate to Goners. I mean, these guys all probably relate to Goners anyway, but it could also relate to the fact that it is one of the 7 flying aces, and over time, the coloring in that Chris did has started to wear away, and it's turning gray again. I just thought I'd mention it. Tau! It exists. It's a metronome. You can find it in the darkness, and you can't talk to it. It just kind of dances back and forth. It's a metronome. The Blocklers. Oh, God. So, we've entered a part of the slideshow I'd like to call minor characters that are impossible to analyze because they don't have enough dialogue to actually give me anything to analyze. These are just blocks with letters on them. Those blocks with letters on them you see all the time in, like, children's classrooms and stuff. They're a B and an O. They talk with B's and extra O's in their dialogue. Wow. But they also kind of look like teeth. I can't be the only one who sees that, right? And maybe that's because these kind of blocks are often chewed on because they're used in classrooms for really young children to teach them spelling. So, children are teething. They're going to bite stuff. But that's really all I can say. There's nothing else I could really extrapolate from these things. The Icon Men. They're like used for one-off joke in Chapter 2. They're computer icons, presumably from the name Icon Men. So the joke is probably because it's a misdirection about... It's one of those classic misdirections. It's possible that they're like having an existential crisis about not actually being anything, but just being the thing that is a shortcut to another thing. Sure. Wig Robot and Yes Man. I have no damn clue. Maybe Yes Man's a confirm button. I mean, he does have check marks for eyes. Sure. And then the Wig Robot, its mouth kind of looks like a loading bar. Maybe. I don't know. All right, now we're in the dark zone, and not in the fun Jackenstein way. In the I have no idea what I'm doing kind of way. ERAM. What a great start, eh? Now, the reason I include ERAM, which, by the way, not its name, just so you know, everybody's just agreed this is its name, so that's what I'm going to call it. But it's not its name. It doesn't have a name. It's just called Nightmare Boss in the files, just so you know. We can't really extrapolate anything from ERAM because that's not its name. ERAM is clearly representative of a real thing inside the shelter, which to me implies it's probably a Darkner. Whatever it represents is, anyway. So we can consider what that thing might be rather than like the in-game ERAM, which everything in the Sword minigame is a representation of something in the real world, right? So this is a representation of a real Darkner, probably, maybe a Lightner, but I'm going to assume Darkner. And I'm going to assume, also, given the emphasis on Chris's red horn headbands in this section, that it is a Darkner based on the red horn headband. Which, hey, that would create a Darkner with connotations about being a demon, right? Interesting. I have a whole video about this, by the way. It's called The Night is Fear Part 1. So if you really want to see a deep dive from me on ERAM, that would be where to go. But for now, let's just say it's not RAM controlling the game. It's a representation of something in the real world, probably Chris's old red horn headband. And when we consider Chris's previous behavior while they were wearing the headband, it would make some sense why ERAM talks to them so sort of antagonistically, and why it might sort of represent a nightmare or a time when they were someone who caused fear, specifically to Noel, right? So it's like a fear boss, kind of like the Titans in a way. And that won't tie into anything else in the slide at all. So yeah, if you really want to know about ERAM, watch the Nightosphere Part 1. Not Nightosphere, by the way, not like the Adventure Time place. The night is fear. I have to say it very enunciatedly. Clover. I think Clover might be the Jack of Clubs. Now, a lot of the card darkeners in all of the card darkeners in Chapter 1 were based on a deck of cards drawn by the artist Canotines, which is why some of them aren't super interlocked in terms of their connotations making them look a certain way, because at the same time we don't know what pictures are on these cards, right? So with Clover, we can see that the Jack of Clubs, it looks like a spades icon on the Canotines card, and I keep mixing it up. It's not spades, it's clubs. The Jack of Clubs, which, okay, sure. There's not really much else to it. I mean, clubs have 3 circles on them, and Clover has 3 heads, so sure, that works. The boy crazy stuff and the 3 different personalities and everything else, I have no idea where that comes from. Really, the only other thing that relates to it being a clubs card is the line, Clover is wilting if you do enough damage to her. So, sorry, Clover, you're just not that interesting in terms of this theory. Hey, look, it's Jockington. You know we're getting into some crazy stuff. Spam pawn. Okay. I have to do a little rant, and it was inspired by somebody's comment, and I want to know, I'm not calling you out specifically. It's inspired me to add this to this slide. So, Spampton and the Addisons are clearly internet ads, right? They might even be email ads. After all, Spampton was the email guy, and now he's the it burns guy. So it makes sense they're spam emails. Now, in the computer lab in Chapter 2, you can find the recycling bin is full of accidentally printed off useless emails. I believe that these are the emails that represent at least Spampton, if not Spampton, and the Addisons. Because if we sort of follow the line of Spampton's life, we can sort of track the entire thing to things happening in the real life. So, at first, he's just an Addison. He's another random email on the computer lab servers, right? He's just another guy trying to make his big break. Then, after meeting with the special someone that changed his life, he moves into Queen's Mansion within the Dark World, right? I believe this corresponds to his visit with Noel, which we have from the sweepstakes detailed, right? Noel clicked on the email, and that logged him in on her account on the laptop, so he was brought into Queen's Mansion that way. Now, after that, he gets kicked out of the laptop after the special someone disappears, right? He gets kicked out of Queen's Mansion. So, the printed out emails could potentially correspond to him being kicked out of the mansion, because instead of being on the computer server still, he is literally put in the recycling bin in real life. And that's why he lives in a garbage dump. Do you get it now? Actually, there is a potential that the Addisons are the clumps of paper you see in the recycling bin, whereas Spampton specifically is the single clump of paper you can see in the trash can. Because he lives in the garbage dump while the Spamptons live in the main city. And again, the trash can technically not a part of the computer world's sort of logic anymore because it's replaced by the recycling bin. So he gets kicked to this little like trash area where he's living in a goddamn garbage can. Literally. It just makes too much sense to not be true, right? I mean, Toby had to have meant this. Otherwise, what's the point of having a bunch of useless emails printed out in the recycling bin? We already had the joke earlier with Jockington. Let me explain this. So, when you first go to the computer lab in Chapter 1, you can talk to Jockington. And Jockington says, Caddy's working, so I'm starting on our project. I've already copied a bunch of pictures. And then Chris narrates, it's the same picture of a soccer ball 73 times. Good on them for counting. Good job, Chris. Jockington, once again, somehow is related to the weird secret boss stuff, because I believe Jockington then makes sense to be the one who printed out all these emails accidentally, because we know he was using the printer the day before and put them all in the recycling bin except for one when it got full that he threw into the garbage, and that was Spamton. So, you know, it's not impossible that someone else could have printed these out and recycled them, but I just think it's funnier if it's Jockington. After all the conspiracy theories we've had about him, he's also linked to Spamton specifically being, like, thrown out. That's funny. Ralsei. Oh, God, it doesn't get easier. None of what I assumed Ralsei was in the past is correct. I strongly believe the Red Horn headband is friend. So I was talking earlier about Eram being representative of something in the real world. I believe that's friend. Friend is associated with demons. There's going to be a slide on friend very soon here. And his conversation with Susie at the start of chapter 3 implies he is just an object like any other Darkner, which there was sort of some potential, you know, scuttlebutt about Ralsei being a super special Darkner that's like made of pure darkness or something. But that's also seemingly not true. Otherwise, his lines in that scene don't make any sense. So he's a normal object, but not the Red Horn headband. What could he be then? I have an idea. Oh, wow, the music cue on that was really good. I think we were talking about the pretend games that Ram told us about in this chapter, that Chris used to play with a girl. What if they had self-insert characters in those games? That would make sense, right? Or, potentially, Chris had a Azrael insert character in that game. Whatever object they used for that character is Ralsei. And that's why he has the connotations of Azrael. Because he is literally a copy of Azrael. He is an object that was imbued with the qualities of Azrael by Chris. Which is why he also has such an appreciation for Chris. Does that make sense? I think that kind of makes sense. And that means he could be any of the potential other things that we had guessed he was before. The missing green crayon. Somebody said a tube of toothpaste. I mean, it's not impossible, I guess. He is called Toothpaste Boy. But I think that's more in reference to the fact that he's so prim and proper. I mean, it could be anything. It could be a drawing, right? But I think that maybe at least explains why Ralsei is so much like Azrael and Chris. It's like Chris's interpretation of Azrael when they were a child. And that interpretation has grown up alongside Chris, so they're like the same age now. It's like if your OC grew in real time beside you and your childhood OC came to life. That's Ralsei. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. King. Why is King so much lower on this list than like Lancer and Queen? Well, it's because I've made a startling realization that may shake the foundations of the entire Deltarune community. Are you ready? The basics of King are pretty easy. He's the King of Spades card, and his unscrupulous behavior probably comes from the associations the King of Spades card has. In cartomancy, the King of Spades is a man of bad faith who takes advantage of you. Yeah, that's King. So that all makes sense. And we know now how King and Queen met because of Ram, so that all makes sense too. But I can't help but notice, right? If Queen is associated with the groups, like the Dreamer and Holiday family's mothers, Carol and Toriel, so strongly, would King not logically be associated with their father figures, Asgore and Rudy? And now, I think you can actually put some traits of Asgore onto King, right? we know that Asgore's kind of pathetic. He's kind of a big softy, despite putting up an intimidating front sometimes, right? That's King. In the cage, anyway. So, if those parts are related to Asgore, then everything else could only be related to Rudy, right? And this is the part where I bring up, we don't know that much about Rudy. What we do know is a little concerning, though. Obviously, he's gotten sick, and recently we've seen him be very paternal to Noelle in a very, like, nice, charming, happy way, right? But, I mean, he has married Carol, after all. And presumably, he doesn't, like, stop her from doing all the things she does to mess with Noelle, mess with her life, and such, right? He doesn't protect her, really, to the point where Des had to do it, right? I don't know. I hate to throw another bone to Rudy Knight fans, all right? You know I do. You know, it's like it's a jovial hatred, okay? In the sense that, like, I don't want to get a billion comments about it, and now I know I'm going to. But, like, I have no problem with the people who actually believe that or that like it. It kind of maybe adds on to this idea that there's more to Rudy than meets the eye. That, like, back when Des was around, before he changed his ways, when Chris was hanging out with the Holiday family, Rudy might have been kind of a bad guy. Is that possible? I mean, every Undertale Deltarune character that's a major character has depth, right? I mean, we just saw with Toriel. Nobody in these games is perfectly nice and good. So maybe Rudy actually is, or at least was, bad at some point, you know? Like, I mean, King doesn't actually hurt Lancer. It's all just a front to scare us, right? But, like, at the same time, he was still going to throw Lancer off a building. And he still does trick and betray the Lightners to get what he wants. I don't know. It's concerning. Let's just leave it at that. And I'll let you guys comment about it instead. El Nino and La Nino. So these two. Oh, God. These two are weather forecasters, obviously. Now, there is a weather channel on the TV, presumably. Tenna even mentions it. He says, what'll the Lightners do without a weather channel, right? When they leave. They're a cloud and a moon, and they're weather forecasters. And why don't they disappear when you give Tenna a Metaton? If they're just literally the weather channel, they should be tied to Tenna, right? It's a weird situation because we've never actually been in this sort of a place before. Like, you always have to recruit Queen, and a lot of the programs that turn into Darkners in Chapter 2 are presumably reliant on Queen existing in order to exist in the Chapter 2 fountain, and then in the Castletown fountain. But we've never actually had Queen leave, for example, right? What does this imply about El Nino and La Nino? Now, the most Occam's razor answer is that in that same line I quoted to you from Tenna earlier, where he says, what'll the Lightners do without the weather channel? He then says, what? Apps? What are apps? So the idea could be that, like, after Tenna leaves, the weather app on Queen as the laptop becomes El Nino and La Nino and allows them to continue to exist within the Dark World. That's possible. The other option is they're just simply not the weather channel specifically. They are something else that is bringing in parts from the weather channel. Just like Shadow Guy, right? Like I kind of explained earlier. Because otherwise, we have to find some explanation for why Shadow Guy can still exist in the Dark World in the closet after Tenna leaves, which that's even harder, right? Like, how does that make sense? So surely these two are some sort of physical object, right? But what would they be? We haven't really seen anything that is weather themed, sun or moon themed. At least I don't think so. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I have a thought. Maybe they are fridge magnets. They say their catchphrase, after all, is the weather always sticks together. And magnets, of course, they are opposites, but they stick together. Right? That makes sense. Right? And then opposites, if you like change a magnets, they can repel each other as well, so that makes sense. And it would sort of imply that, like, okay, this is why the specific traits of El Nino and La Nina's sort of character arc in Chapter 3 are existing. Because if they are fridge magnets, then they are also maybe drawing influence from the family photo that we know is magneted on to the fridge. And that's why we can't really examine the fridge and see if there are any fridge magnets on it, because it's always talk about the photo or the interior of the fridge. They obviously are paralleling the dreamer's divorce. And maybe that's because the family photo is there on the fridge with them. It's a total conspiracy theory, all right? But it makes sense to me. All right. Don't forgetteth about me, says Rules, so I guess we won't. Our last Darkner, Rules card. Yeah, he's the Rules card in a game of cards, as I explained at the beginning of this video. He uses overly verbose language, and he's kind of useless. Why does he also look like Gaster? Why does he have the Gaster teeth? Why does he speak in hands, quote unquote? Why can he teleport like Gaster? Why is he so related to Gaster stuff? Why does he keep being related to more Gaster stuff? I don't get it. Why? We're into the Gaster section of the video, folks. And this is where we go from rational to irrational. I hope you're prepared. So let's start by outlining what we associate with Gaster. Well, 1, the number 6. All of Gaster's battle stats, which were data mined in Undertale, were 666, 666, 666. Also, the entry 17 sound that plays outside the shelter in Deltarune is slowed down by 666%. So that really implies Gaster is related to 6 and 666 specifically. The entry 17 sound, which I just brought up, it's an entry in Undertale that's all in Wingdings. It talks about darker yet darker, the shadows cutting deeper, related to Deltarune. That sound also plays for the garbage noise, which relates to Spamton. That's all Gastery stuff. And then, of course, he's associated with the Wingdings font, but also through the Gonnermaker sequence and Twitter with some strangely spaced fonts like that. So, he also, in his only appearance we've probably seen so far with this mystery man, quote-unquote, sprite on the left you see here, disappears as soon as you talk to him. He's associated with the Gonners through the Gonnermaker. And, of course, the Gonnermaker is on the same level of the game as the save screen, or like the pick your save file menu, the game over menu, the Deltarune intro, where like the text pops up. These are all capitalized files in the game files. And the Gonnermaker files are also, of course, like that, as well as the song that is almost certainly a remix of Gaster's theme from Undertale, Another Hymn. That all ties together. So all of that is Gastery. And finally, given the intro in the Gonnermaker, the Are We Connected, and Chris getting the red soul instead of our vessel, it sure seems like Gaster might be involved with Chris attaining the red soul in some way. So let's start by talking about the Gaster followers before we talk about the Gasters, all right? And this is Jevil, Spamton, and Sham. Jevil and Spamton being influenced by Gaster is something we've thought about for a very long time. Jevil's devil sort of associations, which I brought up earlier, I mean, Gaster's associated with 666, so it's possible that's where it came from. Spamton's is a little weirder, but we'll get there in a second. Sham is different, however. Sham visually resembles Gaster. Sham has the scar going down their eye, as well as the stitches across the mouth, which sort of imply the same thing as Rules, which is the little cut you can see going down from Gaster's left eye into his mouth. The problem with Sham is that they're all on the opposite places they should be. You know what I mean? Like, if we look at the Gaster spread again, like I just said, his left eye has the cut going downwards, whereas his right eye has a cut going upwards. With Sham, their right eye has a cut going downwards, and the stitches that would resemble the cut on Gaster's face going downwards on the, left side, is on the right side instead. It's almost like they're an inverted Gaster reference, which could make sense if Sham is related to Friend, which is implied by King in Chapter 4, when he says that after Jevil was sealed away, I'm paraphrasing, the cat's smile went away on that day. And so far from Friend, all we've seen is a smile, right? Sham has no eyes and no teeth. So Sham being like an inverted Gaster reference is possible. But, okay, that brings up the obvious question. What about Friend, then? Is Friend related to Gaster? Oh, boy. So not only does Friend have a lot of devil motifs, right? I mean, you can see in the top right of this slide, I have the pointed tail that the children are supposed to follow, which is no doubt related to Friend, because Friend is related to cats and cat petters, and this tail is a bunch of orbs, and all the cats and cat petters are made up of orbs. We connected it. It's connected. So Friend also has connections to devilish traits. And guess what? The number 6 as well. Because in this Spamton Sweepstakes blog post from Noelle, we see that she dotted down the chances for each of the cats to appear in the Rare Cats minigame. 80% for normal, 50% for blue aura, 4% for rock and roll, 0% for angel wing, and 0.000% for super holy angel wing. However, she then recounts how she found a very rare cat that actually lowered how many points she had, and then she died immediately, so she couldn't get a picture. This cat, as we see in both the Rare Cats page on the Spamton Sweepstakes and the actual minigame that we get to play in Chapter 4, that's the 6th cat in this list, right? Friend associated with 6? Ho ho ho. I also have on this slide the Forgotten Man for another reason. Now, this kind of spoils a little bit of The Night is Fear Part 1. This is also a bit of a conclusion to that, so if you haven't watched that yet, maybe watch that first, or if you don't care about spoilers, I'm just going to say it. The Forgotten Man also has the similar sort of odd cadence as Gaster does in speech patterns, specifically in Deltarune, right? And I believe that the Forgotten Man is linked to Chris's trauma in the shelter, which is implied by Monster Kid and Snowy when they're talking about the shelter being a big scary place. This is kind of just a summary of the 90s Fear Part 1. So again, this is going to be confusing, but if you watch that video, it'll maybe make more sense. So these two characters are linked in that way. Also, in a very meta sense, Noelle in the blog post has another post that's about cat petters where she gets essentially a bad egg, which never hatches and then leaves home due to happiness, even though it's supposed to leave home due to sadness. We just talked about Friend and opposites with Sham. So technically, Friend and the Forgotten Man are also connected through eggs. The Forgotten Man gives eggs. Friend also gives eggs. So why are these two related? How could they possibly be related? If Friend is the Red Horn headband and the Forgotten Man is some sort of trauma that Chris is suppressing or something like that, how could they possibly be related? Well, I'm going to finally tell you the answer about the person that these guys all are. It's Gaster. I mean, what did you expect? We're in the Gaster section. They're Gaster pieces. And I can prove it. So, if the night is Des, then it makes sense why these Gastery implications keep maybe slipping into the Dark Worlds. Because I think, anyway, there is a high chance that the intro, where someone interrupts the sequence with the vessel and gives the red soul to Chris by saying, you don't get to choose who you are in this world. Your name is Chris. I have a feeling that could be Des, because there's already this sort of consensus that when Des disappeared, Chris was also there. And that is the trauma that Chris has in the shelter, right? That just kind of makes sense for what we've been getting set up in the game so far. And I believe that this happened during the title sequence, when Gaster was essentially making our vessel. And after Des essentially sent the red soul to Chris, and Chris, I guess, was booted out of the shelter or something like that, Des was banished to the same place that the vessel was banished to, which is the void, or wherever Gaster exists within the game. However, my main theory about the Knight is that the Knight is essentially Des's body being piloted by Friend. And that could explain a lot of this Gaster stuff too, because Friend seems to be a Darkner probably formed during the same event based on that trauma of watching Des get essentially sealed away forever and feeling responsible for it. Chris's red horn headband, which they also lost in the shelter on that day, turning into Friend, a little demon, based on Gaster. Because Gaster is the one who created this trauma. Chris and Des are the only ones who have met Gaster within Deltarune's world, other than us, but, we're not really within it. And their two interpretations of Gaster have created, two interpretations of Gaster. The Forgotten Man and Friend. There could be two friends, or they could be a single sort of being. However, we know that Chris apparently went to therapy based on the Chapter 4 Egg Room and the page on the Spamton Sweepstakes, where they're in a therapist office, and they cover up the man they are trying to draw, Gaster, with a tree. So, Gaster is the Forgotten Man. But Gaster, the Forgotten Man, rather, is Chris's suppressed version of Gaster. It's the version that Chris has been able to push down and sort of forget about, right? Friend, however, is the real sort of deal. The reason why Friend is a Darkner based on fear is because of the connotations based on Chris's red horn headband when they used to scare Noelle all the time. And that fear of Gaster specifically, Des's fear, is what has brought Friend to life. That is my personal thought. So the idea would be that through either of these two pathways, through the shadow crystals, which seem to be given by Friend, I was talking earlier, okay, why does Jevil and Spamton have Gasterish sort of associations, or lack thereof? Well, they were given the shadow crystals not by Gaster, but by Friend, who is a representation of Gaster, a Darkner version of Gaster, essentially, which is why the devilish traits have passed on to Jevil, whereas the visual traits of the yellow and red eyes and permanent locked-in smile have transferred onto Spamton. The last part of this is that in the achievements on the PlayStation version of Deltarune, if you get the egg, it's called an issue. Now, we already talked about Gaster being on the same level as the game functions earlier, and these achievements are given in very Gastery text. So why would the eggs and meeting the Forgotten Man be an issue if the Forgotten Man is Gaster? Well, it's because Gaster is invested in our success for whatever reason. So Chris remembering Gaster would essentially create another being of the same power level as presumably the main villain of Deltarune, which is Friend. And yeah, that's my thoughts on the Gaster folks. But okay, I still didn't explain rules. Why is rules like Gaster? Well, the rules card explains the rules. You know who else explains the rules? The rules of Deltarune? That's right, Gaster. Gaster makes the rules in the world of Deltarune. He's the one who decides what the game will be. In the same way rules has the rules of card games and decides what the game would be. And that's why Rules has all these weird Gaster references. The end. Holy cow. Did I make it within 2 hours? Oh yeah, I had half an hour left. My speedrun is complete. I hope you enjoyed this video, even though it was a lot to process. Because that's also how I feel, so we're in the same boat. I'm sure there'll be plenty of comments you guys have to make about a lot of stuff. I might have missed a Darkner here and there, because there's a lot of them, and like I didn't have a checklist, so I was just going off of images that I downloaded from the Spreaders resource. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody important. But yeah, that's it. Oh, God, I can breathe again. Like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.